The venue information wasn't difficult to figure out. Something inside me shifted. You knew for months, and instead of writing to me, you waited until today. I called days ago. You didn't answer, so you thought crashing my wedding was reasonable. His voice dropped. I knew if I came today, you'd at least have to hear me. There it was. He had not appeared because emotion overwhelmed him that morning. He had planned this. He had chosen the one day when rejecting him would mean doing it in front of everyone. Richard looked toward the guests. I've already lost 16 years, Letitia. I'm not losing my daughter's wedding, too. You didn't lose those years. He looked back at me. You chose them. His face hardened. Can we please not create a scene? I almost laughed. He had bypassed security, entered a wedding where he wasn't invited, and demanded a place beside me. But somehow the scene would be mine. Richard straightened his jacket and held out his arm again. Come on, we can discuss everything after I walk you down the aisle. No, Zika, I said. No. A few relatives had moved closer now. Richard noticed them. People are going to wonder why your own father isn't walking you in. Then let them wonder. He lowered his arm. Who is doing it? I held his gaze. Someone who actually showed up. Richard stared at me. Then a calm voice came from behind him. She already told you no, Richard. My father turned. The confidence disappeared from his face. Daniel stood several feet behind my father in the suit he had bought for my wedding. Richard stared at him. Daniel didn't raise his voice or move closer. Do you remember me? Richard's eyes narrowed. No. Daniel held his gaze. Daniel Brooks. Haven House. My father stopped cold. It happened so quickly that I almost missed it. The recognition in his eyes before he looked away. Daniel saw it too. You remember. Richard adjusted his jacket. It was 16 years ago. But you remember. I looked between them. Until that moment, part of me had wondered whether my father had buried that day so completely that he genuinely remembered only pieces of it. He hadn't. Daniel turned toward me. When you told me about those voicemails, I hoped he'd contact you properly. Richard frowned. What does that mean? Daniel ignored him. Laradisha, remember those childhood records you asked me about a few months ago? I nodded. I had been trying to gather the few surviving documents from my years in care. Daniel had searched through the small collection of records legally retained from his professional involvement and the mentorship documentation that followed. I found something. He touched the slim folder he was carrying. My father noticed it. What is that? Daniel looked at him, her Haven House intake summary. Richard's expression tightened. I didn't bring it here because of you. Daniel continued. I was going to give it to Larada after the wedding. Richard shook his head. This is ridiculous. She was there temporarily. Daniel nodded. That's what you told us. Silence. You told me you'd be back before the end of the week. Richard looked toward me. Circumstances changed. The words landed harder than I expected. I stepped forward. Then why didn't you tell me? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Why didn't you call? Laradisha. Why didn't you write? Your mother and I were overwhelmed. We had no money. We were fighting constantly. We couldn't take care of you properly. I'm not asking why you needed help. His eyes met mine. I'm asking why needing help meant disappearing. Richard rubbed a hand across his mouth. You were better off. Daniel's expression hardened. No. Richard turned toward him. Excuse me. Being unable to provide housing for your daughter and choosing to vanish from her life are two different things. You don't know what my family was going through. I know what happened after you left. Richard stepped toward him. This is family business. Stay out of it. Daniel didn't move. You made her my business the day you handed me her suitcase. Richard went silent. Behind us, the wedding had stopped moving. The ceremony was delayed. Guests stood near the garden entrance, pretending not to listen. Marcus remained beside me without speaking, leaving the decision where it belonged, with me. 2 security employees waited near the hallway. Richard looked around and seemed to understand that he was running out of room. Then he faced me again, his voice softened. Letitia, whatever you think of me, I'm still your father. I looked at Daniel, then back at the man who had left 14-year-old me watching through a shelter window. Before I could answer, Daniel opened the old Haven House file. There's something in here she deserves to hear before you ask her for anything. Daniel didn't wave the file around or turn the hallway into a courtroom. He simply opened it. "This is the intake summary from Haven House," he said. Richard stared at the pages. Daniel looked at me first, silently, asking permission. I nodded. He began with the facts. Leotia Morgan, age 14, admitted by Richard Morgan and Denise Morgan. My father looked down. Daniel continued. Both parents provided contact information. Richard Morgan stated the placement was expected to last several days. Richard interrupted. Exactly. It was temporary. Daniel looked up. That's what you intended when you brought her in. What happened afterward is documented, too. Richard went quiet. Daniel turned the page. Haven House attempted follow-up contact. Calls went unanswered. Additional attempts were made. I felt Marcus's hand closed gently around mine. Daniel continued. Neither parent returned to retrieve Letticia. Richard's shoulders dropped. For 16 years, I had imagined dozens of explanations. Maybe they had tried to find me. Maybe paperwork had failed. Maybe someone had told them I had been moved. Maybe there had been some terrible misunderstanding that 14-year-old me never knew about, but Haven House had been exactly where my parents left me. The phone numbers they gave were there. The attempts to reach them were there, and they never came back. I looked at Richard. You knew where I was, he swallowed. Yes. 2 letters had erased 16 years of excuses. I stepped closer. Then tell me why. Richard glanced at the guests behind us and then at Daniel. No. Look at me. His eyes finally met mine. Tell me. He took a long breath. Your mother and I were falling apart. I know. We were behind on everything. Rent, bills. We were probably going to be evicted. I know you had money problems. We thought Haven House would give us a few days, maybe a week. We thought we could fix things. Daniel closed the folder and let him speak. Richard continued. But we didn't fix anything. His voice was quieter now. Your mother and I kept fighting. A few days passed, then more. Denise left me not long afterward. And me? Richard's mouth tightened. I was ashamed. I stared at him. He continued quickly. The longer I waited, the harder it became to go back. I moved away for work. I kept thinking I needed to get stable first. You could have called. I know you could have written. I know you could have walked into Haven House with no money at all and told your 14-year-old daughter that you hadn't forgotten her. Richard closed his eyes. I know. The hallway was completely silent. I kept telling myself you'd probably been placed somewhere better, he said. There's a man outside saying, he's your father. My wedding coordinator barely finished the sentence before I stopped breathing. I was 30 years old, standing in my wedding dress minutes before the ceremony. And I hadn't seen Richard Morgan since I was 14, the day he and my mother left me at Haven House Youth Shelter and promised they'd come back. They never did. I stepped into the hallway and found him arguing with 2 venue employees. He was older, grayer, dressed in a dark formal suit like he belonged there. The moment he saw me, he smiled. You weren't seriously going to get married without your father here. No apology, no explanation. I stared at him. How did you find me? He ignored the question and glanced toward the garden. Who's walking you down the aisle? That was when I understood why he had come. You gave up that right. His smile disappeared. Letticia, parents make mistakes. You can't punish me forever for one terrible period. One terrible period. That was what he called the 16 years after he abandoned me. When I was 14, Dad told me to pack clothes for 3 nights. Mom sat silently in the passenger seat while he drove us across town. I kept asking where we were going until we pulled beneath a sign that read Haven House Youth Shelter. Dad turned around. We just need time to straighten things out. You're coming back? Of course. Inside, a counselor named Daniel Brooks handled my intake while I sat gripping my backpack. Dad signed several forms. It's temporary, he told Daniel. I'll be back before the week is over. Before leaving, he kissed my forehead. I watched my parents' car disappear through the shelter window. For weeks, I refused to unpack my suitcase. Every car outside made me stand up. Nobody came. Calls stopped connecting. Letters came back unopened. Eventually, weeks became months and months became years. Now Richard stood at my wedding acting as if arriving 16 years late made him a father again. "Whatever happened," he said, "I'm here now." That's exactly the problem. You think showing up today counts? A venue employee hurried toward us. "Leia, we need to begin." Richard immediately stepped forward and offered me his arm. "Come on." Before I could answer, footsteps sounded behind me. Richard looked over my shoulder. I watched his expression change as the man approaching us came into view. And suddenly I wondered, what would my father do when he realized the man walking me down the aisle was someone who remembered exactly what he had done 16 years ago? At Haven House, I learned how exhausting hope could be. For the first few weeks, I refused to put my clothes in the dresser. My suitcase stayed zipped beside my bed because unpacking felt like admitting my parents were not coming back. Every afternoon I sat where I could see the parking lot. If headlights turned into the driveway, I stood. If a car slowed near the entrance, I moved toward the window. Most of the time it was a staff member, a social worker, or another frightened kid arriving with a plastic bag of clothes. Never my parents. Daniel Brooks noticed before I ever spoke to him about it. He was 38 then, one of the counselors at Haven House. He never tried to convince me that everything would be fine. One evening, he found me sitting near the front window instead of eating dinner. "You missed your tray," he said. "I'm not hungry." He glanced toward the parking lot. "You're waiting for someone?" I didn't answer. Daniel pulled out the chair across from me. "You don't have to stop hoping today," he said. "But you do have to eat today." That was the first thing he ever said that actually helped. He never promised my father would return. He never told me to forgive anyone. He just kept showing up. After several weeks, Daniel helped me call relatives whose names were listed in my intake paperwork. An aunt said she had no room. A cousin said she couldn't take responsibility for a teenager. We called my parents repeatedly. Nothing. Eventually, their numbers stopped working. That was when the temporary shelter placement became something else. I entered long-term foster care. Daniel stayed involved through the transition, then later through an approved youth mentorship program. Years passed. When I graduated high school, I scanned the audience out of habit. Part with me still expected empty seats. Then I saw Daniel standing near the back, clapping harder than anyone else. When I started college, he helped carry boxes into my dorm. By then, I had stopped calling him Mr. Brooks. He was just Daniel, the person I called when something mattered. 3 weeks before my wedding, I invited him to lunch. He knew something was wrong the moment I started twisting my napkin. "What is it?" I looked at him. "I want you to walk me down the aisle." Daniel went quiet. Then he leaned back. "Are you asking me because you're angry at Richard?" "No. Be sure I am." He waited. I said, "I'm choosing the person who stayed." Daniel looked down for a second, then nodded. "All right." 2 days later, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. That evening, I listened. "Lidoa, it's Dad." My hand froze around the phone. "I heard you're getting married. We need to talk before you make decisions you can't undo." I deleted nothing. I just stared at the screen. The next voicemail came the following day. This time, his tone was sharper. "I don't want you doing something at that wedding that embarrasses the family." That message told me something important. Richard knew about the wedding, possibly more than he should. I called my coordinator immediately. No one gets in unless they're on the guest list. Even relatives, especially relatives. I thought that would be enough. I expected another voicemail, maybe a letter, maybe a phone call from an aunt trying to convince me to talk to him. What I did not expect was Richard himself. On the morning of my wedding, while guests entered through the front garden, my father followed a group of arriving vendors through a side gate. Then he walked straight toward the bridal wing. "I'm not some stranger. I'm the bride's father." Richard's voice carried farther than he probably intended. 2 venue employees stood between him and the bridal hallway, but now several guests had turned toward us. Conversations near the garden entranced as people tried not to stare. One staff member stepped forward. "Sir, you're not on the guest list. We need you to come with us." Richard pulled his arm away. "I'm not leaving my daughter's wedding." Before I could respond, Marcus appeared from the ceremony area. He had clearly been told something was wrong. His eyes moved from Richard to me. Leisha, I'm okay. Marcus came beside me and lowered his voice. Do you want him removed? Richard answered for me. This is between me and my daughter. I turned toward him. No, you don't get to decide what's between us anymore. His jaw tightened. For the first time, Richard seemed to notice how many people were watching. I stepped closer. How did you find this place? I told you I heard you were getting married. From who? He hesitated. That hesitation answered half the question. Dad, your Aunt Carol mentioned the engagement. When? Months ago. I stared at him. Months. Richard exhaled. I found your registry afterward. Somewhere with people who could give you what I couldn't. That wasn't your decision to make without even speaking to me. No. So, you just stopped trying. Richard looked at the floor. I kept waiting until I had a good enough explanation. I almost smiled, but there was nothing funny about it. 16 years didn't make it better. No, for the first time since he had walked into my wedding, he wasn't defending himself. He wasn't telling me what family meant. He wasn't demanding anything. My mother never tried either. Richard shook his head slowly, not in any meaningful way. That answer hurt, but it was clean. There had been no secret rescue attempt, no conspiracy keeping us apart, no misunderstanding. Two adults had made a terrible decision, and when it became difficult to face what they had done, they chose avoidance. I had spent years wondering what was wrong with me. The answer was nothing. I looked at Richard for a long moment. Do you remember what I was wearing? His forehead creased. What? The day you left me. Do you remember what I was wearing? He searched my face. No. I nodded. Do you remember promising you'd come back Friday? His expression changed. Yes, that one. He remembered. I sat by the front window every Friday for months. Richard's eyes dropped. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood you. Maybe you didn't mean the first Friday. Maybe you meant the next one. Leisha, every Friday I thought maybe this was the one. Daniel stood beside us without interrupting. He didn't need to defend me. For once, I could speak for that 14-year-old girl myself. You got to be ashamed somewhere else, I told Richard. I had to live inside what you were ashamed of. His face crumpled slightly. I'm sorry I said nothing. I am, he continued. I'm sorry I left you. I'm sorry I didn't come back. And I'm sorry I came here today acting like, he looked toward the ceremony entrance like I still had a right to this. I nodded once. I hear your apology. Hope flickered across his face. Then I finished. But hearing it doesn't mean I'm ready to forgive you. His expression fell. I understand. He glanced toward the garden. Could I at least stay for the ceremony? I looked at the man who had crashed my wedding because he believed public pressure would force me to hear him. No, Leisha. No. Today is not where you begin fixing this. He stared at me. If there is ever a conversation after today, I decide when it happens. You don't show up at my home. You don't contact Marcus. You don't ask relatives where I am. Richard nodded slowly. All right. I turned toward security. Please escort him out. Richard didn't argue. That might have been the first respectful thing he did all day. He walked past the guest without taking my arm, without entering the ceremony, without getting the father of the bride moment he had arrived expecting. Several relatives had heard enough to understand what had happened. For years, some of them believed my parents, and I had simply lost touch. That story ended in that hallway. Richard left knowing he could no longer control how our family understood those 16 years. A few minutes later, Aunt Carol found me. Her face was pale. Leisha, I'm sorry. I looked at her. He asked about you months ago. I told him you were engaged. I thought he wanted to make things right. You gave him the wedding information. Not directly. I mentioned enough that he must have found the registry. I nodded. From now on, nobody gives him information about me without asking me first. You have my word. I returned to the bridal room. For several seconds, I just stood in front of the mirror. Then I picked up my lipstick and fixed what had smudged. Daniel appeared in the doorway. We can postpone, he said. Nobody would blame you. I put the lipstick down. No. You sure? I looked at myself, then at him. I've waited long enough for people who weren't coming. Daniel smiled softly. All right. The ceremony resumed. When the doors opened, Daniel stood beside me. He didn't automatically offer his arm. He simply looked at me. Ready? I took it myself. Ready. We started walking. That was the moment Richard had come to claim. But Daniel had never demanded it. He had never told me I owed it to him. He had simply been there at Haven House, at graduation, at my college dorm, and now at my wedding. Marcus waited at the end of the aisle. When we reached him, Daniel placed my hand in Marcus's. He hugged me. Then he took his seat. No speech, no spectacle. He didn't need one. I married Marcus, surrounded by people who had chosen to stay. Richard didn't appear in a single wedding photograph. Weeks later, a letter arrived. His name was on the envelope. I almost left it unopened. Eventually, I read it. There were no demands. Richard wrote that leaving me at Haven House had been his decision, and that financial hardship did not excuse disappearing afterward. He admitted that crashing my wedding had been selfish. He wrote that he had wanted the visible role of father without doing the invisible work that came before it. At the end, he said he would respect whatever level of contact I chose. I kept the letter. I didn't answer immediately. Months later, I sent one message. I received your letter. Nothing else. Maybe one day there will be more. Maybe there won't. But that decision belongs to me now. My mother Denise remained absent. I stopped chasing explanations from someone who had 16 years to offer one. Marcus and I built our home without letting my parents' choices determine what family would mean inside it. Daniel remained part of our lives. And eventually, one wedding photograph became my favorite. It sits framed in our living room. I'm walking toward Mark. My hand is wrapped around Daniel's arm. Sometimes I look at that picture and think about the 14-year-old girl sitting beside the Haven House window with her suitcase still packed. For years, she thought being abandoned meant she wasn't worth returning for. She was wrong. The adults responsible for her had failed. Richard finally gave me the admission I once desperately wanted. But his apology taught me something else, too. Acknowledgement does not automatically restore access. He arrived at my wedding believing biology entitled him to stand beside me. He left understanding that fatherhood was never just a title he could reclaim 16 years later. It was 16 years of choices he could never go back and make.